Picture this: you're 17 years old, young enough to be considered a child by psychologists, but old enough to be treated as an adult by the criminal justice system. You're impulsive, emotional, and easily influenced, like most teenagers. And yet, within a matter of hours, your identity can become frozen in time. Not as a student, son, friend, or any other thing you might identify with, but just as a headline. That's exactly what happened in the case of Christopher Simmons. His crime was horrific, his actions were inexcusable, but in the weeks, months, and even years that followed, something else happened, far bigger than the case itself. Christopher became a symbol, not because he wanted to, or because anyone truly knew him, but because the media needed a villain to fit that moment. That moment being the early 2000s, which was primed with fear. Let's think about it. America was wrestling with anxiety about youth violence. Politicians warned of the collapse of moral values. Journalists were emphasizing brutality and shock value. And the criminal justice system was heavily influenced by the culture around it, swinging towards harsher and harsher punishments for minor. In this environment, nuance disappeared, and young people like Simmons were not portrayed as complex individuals capable of growth or change. Instead, they were portrayed as dangerous and even predatory. Today, we're diving into the story of Christopher through a lens that often gets ignored, just how the media shapes narratives surrounding cases. To understand how the media shaped this case, we need to start with the story itself. In 1993, Christopher Simmons was a 17-year-old from Fenton, Missouri, and he lived what many would describe as a troublesome childhood, with instability at home, behavioral issues, and influences from peers who reinforced risky decisions. But the crime he eventually committed was undeniably tragic and violent. On the night of March 8th, Simmons, along with two friends, Charles and John, planned to burglarize the home of Shirley Crook. Their plan escalated far beyond theft, though. They bounded and blindfolded Miss Crook, and Christopher eventually threw her off a bridge into the river, leading to her death. After his arrest, Simmons confessed, and prosecutors emphasized a crucial detail: that Simmons reportedly boasted beforehand that he could get away with it because he was a minor. This alleged statement became a cornerstone of media framing, and during his trial, Simmons was portrayed as remorseless and fully aware of his actions. The jury then convicted him of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death at 17 years old. He was placed on death row. Years passed, psychological research on adolescent brain development began entering courtrooms at last. Eventually, the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In Romper v. Simmons, the court ruled 5-4 that executing individuals who were under 18 at the time of their crime violated the Eighth Amendment ban on cruel and unusual punishment. This ruling changed how American law was executed permanently. In order to understand the public reaction to Simone's crime, we need to look at the larger cultural moment unfolding at the time. In the mid-1990s, a theory emerged that would drastically shape criminal justice policy: the super predator theory. Political scientist John Doolio warned that America was on the brink of a wave of violent youth offenders, that being teenagers who he claimed lacked empathy, morals, or even the ability to appreciate consequences. News outlets ran with it. Television segments showed grainy footage of young offenders in handcuffs, often children of color, reinforcing racialized tropes of danger. Newspapers printed headlines predicting an explosion of youth violence. Politicians repeated the term super predator in speeches to justify harsher sentencing laws. But here's the truth: the wave of super predators never arrived. In fact, youth crime dropped dramatically in the years following the theory's rise. Researchers later admitted the predictions were wrong. Giulio himself publicly retracted the theory, but by then the damage had been done. The fear stuck, and the law stuck, and the image of violent, remorseless, irredeemable teenagers became a powerful cultural symbol. When Christopher Simmons admitted his crime, He entered a cultural environment primed to see young offenders as threats, not children, as predators and not people. And the media, consciously or not, helped ensure that Simmons fit neatly into that mold along with him and other teenagers. The way Christopher Simmons was covered in the media was not neutral. It was shaped by fear, by political context, and the super predator narrative that saturated American consciousness. Headlines focused obsessively on his age, and articles highlighted the shocking aspects of the crime. News reports often also emphasized his alleged bragging about getting away with it. This detail became a symbol. Whether or not the statement was fully understood in context, media outlets portrayed it as evidence of a cold, calculating mind, further reinforcing the idea that Simmons was not just dangerous, but irredeemable. There were lots of aspects missing from most coverage, though, such as context, adolescent impulsivity, peer influence, trauma history, and lack of prefrontal cortex maturity. The media rarely explored the science developing at the time, the emerging understanding that teenage brains are not fully developed, that impulse control and risk assessments are fundamentally different in minors compared to adults. Instead, Simmons was framed as the ultimate example of the violent teen America had been warned about. His story aligned too neatly, too conveniently, and with the super predator narrative. This framing influenced not only public perception, but arguably the legal process itself. Prosecutors felt pressure to appear tough. Jurors saw a compelling, fear driven narrative they already believed, and harsh punishment became the expected response. Whether consciously or unconsciously, Simmons was cast as a 17-year-old who committed a horrific act, but as the embodiment of a national fear. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Alex Morgan, a scholar in juvenile justice and media influence. Dr. Morgan, thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you for having me.
I want to begin with the bigger picture. How did the super predator narrative influence how Americans viewed young offenders during the 1990s and early 2000s?
It had a massive impact. The term super predator was repeated so often in news media that it became accepted as fact. The public began seeing violent teens as miniature adults, fully aware of their actions, fully responsible, and inherently dangerous. This was not based on science, but on fear-based predictions that turned out to be mistaken.
Specifically regarding Christopher Simmons, do you believe this cultural narrative influenced his sentencing?
Without question, judges, jurors, and prosecutors are human. They're shaped by the same media environment as everyone else. When a culture is primed to view teenage offenders as ruthless and beyond rehabilitation, the harshest penalties become more acceptable. Simmons was prosecuted at the height of this fear. His actions were terrible, but the lens through which society viewed him made it almost inevitable that he would receive the death penalty.
By the time the Supreme Court viewed the case, something had shifted. What changed?
Research, neuroscience entered the courtroom. Scientists demonstrated that the clear difference between the adolescent and adult brains, differences in impulse control, risk assessment, and susceptibility to peer influence. The court recognizes juveniles as constitutionally different from adults, which became the basis for abolishing the juvenile death penalty in Roper versus Simmons.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Your insight helps put this case into much broader context.
My pleasure.
The story of Christopher Simmons forces us to confront something uncomfortable: the way media narratives shape justice. Because the truth is, stories shape reality. The stories we tell about crime shape our fears, and the stories we tell about youth shape our laws. And the stories journalists amplify, accurately or not, can determine whether a teenager is viewed as a human being or as a monster. The super predator era has since been discredited. The predictions were wrong, the data was wrong, and yet policies built during that era still affect thousands of young people today, such as harsh sentencing laws, adult transfer statutes, and public perceptions about young offenders did not simply disappear when the theory was retracted. Roper v. Simmons corrected one of the most extreme outcomes, the juvenile death penalty, but the deeper cultural issue remains. When fear drives policy, justice is often compromised. So here's the call to action: be critical of the stories you consume, interrogate the headlines, look deeper than the seasonal narrative. And when it comes to youth and justice, remember that adolescence is a period of growth, not a final verdict on someone's character. Christopher's case changed the legal landscape, but what it should also change is how we talk about young people, accountability, and the possibility for change. Thank you for joining me on this journey through crime, media, and the Supreme Court case that reshaped juvenile justice in America. My name is Jennifer Martinez, and this was my true crime podcast that deep delved into real life cases. Thank you.